flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to accept tonight's agenda?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
More, you got to turn your video or your sound off.
So Dr. Harrison, over to you for your district updates.
Great. So good evening, everyone. I hope that everyone had a healthy and happy Thanksgiving. And I appreciate the efforts that many in our community made by not traveling and keeping your gatherings small. And those of you that had to travel, I appreciate the level of transparency that you had with us here in the school district. This weekend certainly was a challenging one, as Sunday we learned of 2 COVID cases here in the school district. One was at Irvington High School, where we had a couple staff members and approximately 7 students who are either being quarantined or isolated. But the Dow's Lane matter was much more complicated because the positive individual became symptomatic in school on Friday, which led us through really a bit of a maze in looking at the contact tracing that we had to perform, because it led all the way back to Wednesday. And when we do that, we had to take a close look, utilizing the guidance that we are receiving from the district physician, as well as the Department of Health, to look at proximate contact. So proximate contact is looked at in 2 different ways. The first is that we're looking at individuals that are in the same space with the positive individual for 10 minutes or longer. So in that scenario, think of a standard classroom. If you have a student or a teacher that is positive, and those individuals that were in that room would be considered contacts and would need to quarantine. Additionally, there's another way of looking at how the proximate contact is formulated, and that's where it really led to the complex situations here at Dow's Lane. The second approach is taking a look at the period of time in which the individual was perceived to be contagious. So since the individual became symptomatic on Friday, the person then is perceived to have been contagious all the way back to Wednesday. And guidance also tells us that we want to look at cumulative contact that individuals may have had up to 15 minutes over that period of time. So as you can imagine, that took quite a bit of time. And thinking about not just the individuals that were in that classroom that I outlined in the first scenario, but thinking about the conversation in the hallway, the interaction in a bathroom. And when you start to add up all of those contacts, it led to a scenario where we had a number of students and a number of staff members that were in contact with the individual. Now, when we think about that, that in itself would have made it difficult for us to be able to open our schools. But the effects of this were also compounded by another COVID case that we had a week ago, whereby we had a couple staff members and more students that were also quarantined. So based on the scenario and how it played out here, utilizing the guidance from the Department of Health, we frankly didn't have enough staff to be able to run the building. I want to say that reinforce that there are no signs of any type of viral spread within our schools. Each and every one of the contacts that have happened, or each one of the positive cases that we've had in the district since the beginning of September, all appear to have come from outside of the school environment. I don't want to say that there's any excuses here, but what I do want to acknowledge is that with every single one of these situations, we always look for learning opportunities. After the last closure at Dow's early in the year, we made some adjustments in our plans, adjustments to how individuals interact in the building. And here too, we're going to look for opportunities for improvement. But when there's really that challenge of looking at interactions over the course of 3 days, considering any interactions individuals may have outside of school, it really, really complicates the matter. However, we're still committed to making any kinds of adjustments wherever possible to eliminate contacts that individuals may have in our schools. So we're certainly disappointed that we've had to transition to 100% remote for the next 2 weeks. But it's very clear to us that we could not open and operate our schools safely with the limited number of staff available to us. I do want to provide yet another update on the AM/PM model, the expansion that we're looking for grades 2 and 3. At the next Board of Education meeting, we'll present an overview of the work that we've done to this date. That next meeting is the 22nd of December. Ms. Ellis and I are in this process, have reviewed a fair amount of academic data to help inform any recommendations. We are also meeting with all of the second and third grade teachers and the school administration to be able to review what we believe is best for our students academically, socially, and emotionally. But I want to be transparent that we are struggling to find any academic data that would support that movement in itself, the expansion of the AM/PM model, especially in light of the lack of parent support behind that. So between now and then, aside from the meetings, the continued review of data that we are engaging in, there will be a survey that will go out to parents for second, third grade, particularly those parents who in the last survey expressed their objection to the transition to the AM/PM model. The reason for that certainly is not to single anybody out, but we just want to understand. We want to get another round of feedback from you to help understand where the challenges were for you, if it was philosophical, if it was logistics, if it was related to your employment, if it was childcare, to see if there's some way that we can identify a theme that may be coming back through that survey data, and that if we could address what that challenge is, we may be able to make some adjustments and move into that model. So we're looking for some more information, and then we'll present some updates at the meeting on the 22nd. Additionally, Ms. Ellis is working with our administrative team in finalizing some surveys that are going to go out district-wide on the holistic experience since reopening school in the hybrid model, and of course, the model for K1, the AM/PM. That survey will go out to staff, members, parents, and students in our secondary schools will complete that as well. Related to this topic, though, I do want to clarify and some questions that have been asked in the community related to the Dow's Lane specials. We understand and know that many parents are asking for specials to be facilitated during the remote period of the school day. Had we had the opportunity to move to expand the AM/PM model to all grades at Dow's Lane, we would have been able to make that shift. However, based upon the fact that we are literally running 2 schedules within one school building, it's almost like we're operating 2 separate schools within that building, but we're utilizing the same staff of specialists. As a result, we are not able to provide our teachers with lunches and their breaks or the preparatory periods as is required and as is necessary within the current confines of the schedule. But if we were to make that move, as was communicated in the survey initially that went out to the Dow's Lane community, if we were to make that move to a full AM/PM model for grades K through 3, we would be able to make that transition. But so as long as we're in the current model with 2 different schedules running, that is the traditional hybrid, 2 days in, 3 days out, and the AM/PM model at the same time, we are unable to provide specials outside of the school day. I do want to provide another update related to testing in yellow zone. If Irvington was ever to become designated a yellow zone, I provided some thorough communications, and I would certainly refer you to the postings that are on the website related to this. Again, I want to thank so many parents that have completed the consent form already. To date, we've received upwards of somewhere between 900 and 1,000 responses so far, which is incredible. So thank you very, very much. Tonight, the board will approve a contract with a vendor that will actually facilitate the testing for the school district. And once that is done tonight, we'll begin our final planning process to outline the details for testing should we ever need it. And of course, we hope we don't. I also want to highlight that last Tuesday, we hosted a Zoom call with our partners from NYU's Metro Center related to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative. On this call, we outlined the district initiatives and really asked NYU to dig into the details of the work that we will engage in over the coming years. So we had about 65 people join us for that informative call, and I thank everyone that came out that night. We had a number of staff members, our administrative team joined us, community members, and some students. So thank you very much. If you missed it, I encourage you to go to the website. Under the district news section, you will see a link to the actual recording of that event. So please take the time. It's about an hour and a half long. And review that presentation to get a window into the work that is going to be occurring here in the Irvington schools. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to all of our student athletes who completed their fall season. Students really rose to the occasion despite all the obvious challenges that were before them. We had a number of teams that competed in the sectionals. We had some champions in our cross-country teams. And I want to congratulate our tennis coach, Gina Marr, who was just recently recognized as the Coach of the Year. So congratulations to all. We keep our fingers crossed and keep watching what's happening related to COVID in the region to see its effects on our schools. We are hopeful that our winter athletes do have some opportunities to compete. They've begun some training, but no full team practices as of yet. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can somehow get this virus under control. But at the end of the day, regardless of our desire to participate in athletics, our desire to increase student attendance, and by saying that I mean more time in the building for all of our students, our first priority has to be on the health and safety of all the individuals in our school community. And in doing so, we have to have an eye on what's happening and watching the local positivity rate. We have to make sure that our schools are healthy and safe spaces for our students and our staff. So at this time, let's just kind of take everything slow. We will give an update on the reopening plans and any impacts and possibilities for Dow's Lane on the 22nd. And then we'll keep our fingers crossed and see what the section and or the state of New York decide is the fate of winter athletics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. So we'll move on to our committee updates at this point, starting with the B&G, and I'll handle that. And as always, Ms. Stein will correct whatever I managed to omit or get wrong. I think as we reported out last time, we were going to be receiving the bids for the projects in early December. The bid opening was this past Friday. Most of the projects saw about 6 bidders, and at this point, the professionals, mostly the team from Triton, are going through the bids and meeting with the lowest few bidders for each project to make sure that there are no scope questions and that everyone was bidding on the correct stuff, so that way they can properly evaluate all of the bids and make their initial recommendations to the B&G committee about which would be the bidders that we should look to accept for those projects, and also have a discussion of the costs related to each of the bids and any other issues or concerns. The next B&G meeting is on the 18th. After that, depending on where we're at, I don't think it will be at the meeting on the 22nd, given all of the other things that are on for that meeting in terms of presentation-wise, but I expect either our first meeting in January, or potentially we'll look to schedule a special meeting for the B&G committee to report back on the bids, where we're at from a budget standpoint, and just in general where we are at this point in the project. As you know, once we start to look to award bids, that is another main decision point in the process, because at that point, obviously, we're deciding which projects to go forward with, and having a better understanding of the actual costs of those projects beyond the estimates that we've had up to this point. So there'll be more to come. B&G, I think, will have a busy December into early January, dealing with both the bids, but also looking at the project holistically to see where we are on our overall budget, because just because something is higher in phase one, if things are lower in phase two, there may be offsets, but our architect is still working on phase two to look at the designs and figure out where we're at and whether there are potential changes or savings that can be realized in that portion of the project as well. So more to come.
I just, Brian, wanted to add one note, which you mentioned Triton, who's helping work with Ms. Stein on looking at the bids. And Triton is our construction oversight partner. Right? Is that the right way to characterize them?
I think probably they're technically probably the owner's rep is probably, I think, how they'd be referred to, since they are in place to both help us evaluate the bids, but also as construction actually takes place, to be here on site, manage the process, manage the change order process, and make sure that the contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that we don't wind up getting charged for things that should already be in scope.
Excellent, thank you.
Communications, is there someone from that committee that would like to provide an update on the last meeting?
All right, at our most recent meeting, we did some updates on advocacy on the New York State support for COVID testing. And subsequent to that meeting, we did find out that we had the advocacy was excellent on a regional basis, with well over 15,000 responses. And since then, we've been updated on our own testing work here and the subject of communication throughout the community. We also worked on the Thanksgiving travel reminders in the presentation by Dr. Huff, which people will be familiar from our last meeting. And then we had some internal matters that we had to talk about involving how we communicate amongst ourselves. As long as I'm speaking, I wanted to also update on what's going on with IASCAB. At our 11:10 meeting, there was a lot of work done on a project from the students to the community. I think I reported on that earlier, but just this morning, in keeping with Dr. Harrison's update, the students and all the members of IASCAB from the various parts of the village and the school communities had a very helpful workshop on mental health during COVID and mental health in light of the holiday season and COVID. And I have to say, there are approximately 30 to 40 students up from 8th grade through 12th grade on those committees, and their work is very amazing and laudable and mature. And everyone felt that the resources provided in the district are something to be very proud of. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Dave, do you want to talk about the recent curriculum committee meetings?
I'm going to turn it over to Maura.
Okay.
Thank you. So let's see, there were two meetings that have taken place since we last reported. So in the November 17th meeting, we were looking at the 9th grade writers studio, including responses in the survey of students, as well as how that writing class that all 9th graders take it has been altered over the years, and how the goals for it have changed, and other related matters. We talked about assessing elementary student progress, and I believe that some of that information was included in the presentation that took place to the board in the prior, was it the prior meeting? In the more recent meeting, which took place on December the 2nd, we had reviewed the high school course flowcharts, which essentially are a structure that helps to guidance counselors and administrators to guide students through their high school course, so their course choices. Is that fair to say, fellow curriculum committee members? So we had to look at what's there and how it's communicated about, and some discussion around that, as well as how things might potentially be changed in the future and what processes would be in place to do that. We also had a review of the elementary data, which Dr. Harrison alluded to in his community discussion just now, and some discussion of the Dow's Lane model, which also was referred to. Please let me know if I've left anything out. Okay.
The only other thing we talked about was a little bit about the SEL work that's being led in the district, the partnership with Castle and the committees that will be formed to participate in that training, to develop the training and the planning that will to develop the K-12 SEL plan, and some dialogue related to the NYU work.
Thank you. I'll just make a brief note. We're going to do the liaison updates, but after that, we'll have an opportunity for community comment. So if there are people in the audience who want to make a comment at this point, please go and address in the Q&A feature in Zoom so you can be recognized when we get to that. So Beth, I think you just updated, it seems like UNCAB is part of the communications piece. Dave, I know you said you had an update from the village, so if you want to go ahead with that, please.
Certainly. Our partners at the village board had their meeting last night on Monday the 7th, and wanted to relay a couple things. One was that the village board of trustees are initiating the police policy task force. They're starting it this week, led by county facilitators. And just last night, the board of trustees approved a number of community participants. So there's a big piece out there. And public hearing on creating the multifamily office zoning continues. So there's more to that. So people who want to get involved, they can get involved. It'd be really helpful. She asked if we would remind folks that they can access all the agendas, including the draft proposal, and view the meetings on the village website. And they were also very thrilled with the diversity piece. One of the trustees' children attended, and they're really excited about it. So it was received very nicely.
Thank you. Are there any other liaison updates from any of the other trustees? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A at this point, so we'll move on to the rest of our business. There'll be another Q&A portion, another opportunity for community comment at the end. We're going to move to the consent agenda, but before we do that, item 10.2 total requires a roll call vote, so we're going to take that out of the consent agenda. So if I can have a motion to amend the agenda to remove item 10.2 from the consent agenda and move it into the regular agenda, and we'll then address that after we deal with the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So let's now start with the consent agenda. Are there any questions on the items in the consent agenda?
I had just a question related to 10.3, the contract for COVID-19 testing.
Go ahead.
I was just curious, I mean, there's a lot of different components and we've discussed some of those in prior meetings. In regards to the cost for testing, I've seen a lot of different prices out there and indications that it can shift over time. But in this case, the contract has it as a set price, I believe. So I just had a question about whether, about that piece and whether there's a possibility if costs shift for testing, would that be a possibility of adjusting at a later time, up or down?
Yeah, so thank you, Michael. The expenses associated with this are simply in really two areas. One, it's for the staffing. So for the medical professionals that are going to be registered nurses in most cases that will be administering the test. So it'll be the compensation for those individuals. And then any setup related to the model that we're looking to implement, which would be a drive-through model with tents and tables and the like, that they actually provide a service where they have staff that come out in advance of the testing clinics to do all that setup so that it isn't an additional strain on our staff. There are no expenses associated with the actual purchase of the tests or the testing equipment themselves. That is all to be provided by the Department of Health.
Well, thanks for that clarification. I'm reminded of that now that you say it. And one or two other questions. It's also noted that, you know, if we're able to set, if it, you know, needs to go on for a period of time, have we identified locations that we could keep this up for a period of time, or would it have to be broken down and set back up on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, the model that they utilize is flexible enough that would enable us to break it down and set it up on a regular basis as needed. But with the contract being approved this evening, we're going to follow through with some other levels of planning, which will also explore some possibilities of alternate locations, recognizing how congested each of our school campuses already are. That added congestion associated with the testing could add some challenges. So we're exploring some alternates that could complement our plan as it sits today. But we would anticipate that the testing would be set up and broken down on a daily basis. We're also beginning to compensate some planning with our partners at Camp Mohawk, especially Adam Wallach, who's a community member who's been really an outstanding partner, coming up with contingency plans in the event we had some serious inclement weather on the day that we planned for testing, how we could really adapt and bring the testing indoors to be able to actually protect the healthcare providers that would be administering the tests.
Thank you. And then one final question. Has there been a scenario or scenarios developed to assess what the cost to the district might be? You know, if it ran for X amount of time?
I haven't done that, Michael, yet, but I could run that out. I mean, really, right now, we're just trying to figure out how the likelihood of this happening, and then also, you know, how many days it would take to do it. So we could potentially meet our target in one sitting because we have already enough volunteers in terms of the students, and although we like to have everybody that way, when it's random, we can just call on everybody, but we probably could beat it in 1 or 2 sessions. So a lot will depend on exactly how the mandate is when it happens to us, and what we do. I think we have to kind of just play it by ear, as my mother would always say, play it by ear.
But Michael, if the board would like those estimations, we could certainly provide that. It would be pretty simple to do. In looking at this and the experience of the staff that we're partnering with, they have proven to be extremely efficient in their testing, and scenarios where they have sufficient staffing available that literally could be testing 30 people within a 15-minute window. So when you think of we would need to test, and I would deliberately break the testing into 2 days of testing to keep our cohorts separated and to schedule the testing so that when we think of the 48-hour look back period or the 48-hour window for viral shed, that we would not be impacting though people having to quarantine for having been in school. So for example, I would have cohort B tested early in a week and cohort A tested later in the week so that we could limit those interactions that would have an impact on school operations and large scale numbers having to quarantine. So breaking it over 2 days, we'd be testing approximately 200 people on a given day. So with a team of nurses, we could easily do a cohort in 5-6 hours in a given day. So we could break it out. It would be a few $1,000s likely for expenses associated with each round of testing.
I mean, it sounds like you have a pretty solid scenario right there. I certainly would be interested just in having a sense of what obviously it's an obligation we have to do, but it's good to know what kind of expenses we face.
I'll work that up.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So we'll now move on to item 10.2. Ms. Stein, you want to just talk briefly about what 10.2 entails?
Sure. So New York Liquid Asset Fund, otherwise known as NILAF, is one of our investment cooperatives. So similar to purchasing cooperatives or insurance cooperatives, we actually use an investment cooperative. This cooperative is, again, for schools and by schools. We have allowed some other municipalities into the fund too. So there's actually City of White Plains. There's a bunch of other municipalities and things in this fund. But the fund exists for school districts. It's run by a board of governors of school district officials. I am actually on the board as well, just for full disclosure. So the fund is making a change from its investment provider or investment consultant to a different investment consultant. And when that change happens, our bylaws state that the Board of Educations of the participants, of which we are a participant, need to approve that change. So we've had several meetings within the Board of Directors of NILAF, and I present this change to you. It really will have no impact on the fund. We think it'll actually have an improvement to the fund, and as opposed to any deleterious impact. We're already using PMA as our administrator. Many of these local government investment pools, which is what it's called, use the same administrator as the investment consultant and therefore save money for the fund. So really, there's not a risk here. PMA is an excellent company with a large track record. They've been, I think, serving on our fund for about 12 years already. So should not be an issue. I support it, and so we need to, as a formality, really approve this resolution, and they've asked us to do it as a roll call just so that we have a record of it so they can put it into their minutes and whatnot.
I have a question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Ms. Stein, does PMA act in this role of investment manager for other school districts or pools?
Yeah, they do. For other local government investment pools, they do. They have probably at least 14 that they're already acting in that role, and they have significant assets under management. So this is really something that they do. It's in their wheelhouse, yes.
And the staff I see from this are going to be the same people who have been working in this function
Right. So
under RBC. They're going to be moved to PMA?
Yep, 100% of the staff is going. RBC is basically spinning this off because they don't want it anymore. RBC is the Royal Bank of Canada. They're based out of Canada and Minnesota. This one group works in Pennsylvania. They'll stay there for now, but that office will stay there. They actually have an office in Fishkill as well. So we have multiple locations based on the fund, but they will all 100% of the employees will just be absorbed by PMA.
So where's the cost savings?
The cost savings are that the fees that we have to pay RBC will be lowered because the fees we're going to pay to PMA will be less because they're
Thank you
already
so
doing
much.
our administrative work. So there's a synergy there.
Thank you.
And I just had a quick question in terms of our relationship. How much of what is the total of our funds that we have with this?
So Michael, that varies based on the time of year. Right now, we probably have put most of our tax money there. Typically, when the rates are higher, I put as much money of our liquid money that I can because their rates are generally the highest that I can get. Keeping in mind that the rates are reflecting liquidity, safety, and security. So they have to follow all of the GML laws at a local bank that we would use. We also keep money with Chase primarily, and those are our two main banks that we're keeping money with. So we have both. Right now, the rates are low. We're not earning a lot of interest income. You're going to hear that in the budget presentations coming up. So it's not quite as critical that I keep as much money there, but again, we try to support the fund because we are a fund of school district funds, and we need to make sure we're maintaining our overhead with the funds. Similar to why I keep a certain amount of money in Chase because we want to make sure we're maintaining our relationship with them. So we basically balance it, but so generally we keep almost all of our liquid cash in those two places right now between Chase and NILAC.
And I think this is a fund that when your prior district, White Plains, they participate. Are there other area districts that participate?
Oh, there's many. The list is huge. We have in fact, in Westchester, we have the highest penetration. And then Long Island and upstate, there's basically every region of New York State. There's two main funds in New York for New York schools. It's NICLAS and NILAC. So those are the two main funds. Right now, the rates are pretty competitive. They're always pretty competitive. For a long time, NILAC was better. Sometimes NICLAS is better. A lot, it depends on investments and the maturity that you have, whatever they're picking as an investment. But they're generally in the same ballpark. So, and right now, it's all competitive with everybody because rates are just low.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So we'll now take a vote on item 10.2. Dorina, you going to call everyone? Okay. Aye.
Does it need a motion or no?
Does it need a motion for the roll call vote, or does the vote just? Yeah, because it's going to be an individual roll call vote. So I didn't think there was a motion for that. It would be, each trustee will vote.
I think you do need a motion.
Do you need a motion?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to record the motion was made by and then the roll call vote.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve our agreement with NILAF?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and now Doreen will take the vote. Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. So we now have our second community comment section or I guess period in our meeting. So if there's anyone who wants to make a comment or has a question, again, please put your name and address in the Q&A feature in Zoom and you'll be recognized. Before we get to that, I think there was a trustee question about something from earlier. So Beth, go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Harrison, I just wanted to clarify something. First of all, I wanted to clarify for the public, to all of us, that when the Board of Trustees learns about COVID cases, it's under the confidentiality rules of HIPAA and FERPA. And we don't have individually as trustees very detailed information, and under law we should not, regarding who is quarantined or who is an index case or who is a contact. I believe that there may be some misunderstanding about that.
Yes, yeah, that is absolutely correct. We do not communicate to the board or even within our respective schools, individuals that have tested positive. The only individuals that ever learn of the actual names of those folks would be the administrators and the medical staff in the respective schools, who would appropriately be made aware of that information. But we certainly do not convey anyone's personal health information to the Board of Education or to other staff members in the school district.
Thank you for clarifying that. And it was helpful today to hear, I do know that the last time Dow's Lane closed, there were some changes made about the contacts between some specials and some students and some teachers after you were able to review lessons learned. And that with the cases only coming up on Sunday, lessons learned are going to take some more time to determine. But I believe it's still the case that it is the Department of Health that decides who's going to quarantine still. It is not really the district who decides on the meaning of proximate contact or close contact. Ultimately, that decision does belong to the Westchester County Department of Health.
That is correct. The only asterisk I would add to that point is that the Department of Health is so overwhelmed that their reporting process has changed a little bit. We implement our all the Department of Health guidelines. We consult with our school physician, and then we submit our reports in writing to the Department of Health, along with an explanation of the situation, a list of contacts using a common template that New York State has developed. And if they believe there's any different approaches that should be taken, whether fewer people or more people should be quarantined, they will provide us with that guidance. Otherwise, they proceed by simply confirming the actions that we've taken in the schools. Early on, though, we'd sit there and literally talk through every scenario with them. They are so overwhelmed that they don't have the staffing manpower to be able to do that at this time.
Right.
But all the details are provided to the Department of Health. And from there, they ask us questions. If need be, they'll make adjustments. And then they forward all the respective information to the contact tracing unit.
And they can make adjustments in either direction, as you
They
just
can.
said.
Yes, they can.
Okay, thank you for that. I do know that the Department of Health has said that school districts themselves now have become very important partners, so thank you for that.
Thank you. So on community comments, I see we have Sarah Parganos, 90 Fargo Lane. Ms. Parganos.
Hi. So in thinking about some ways to maybe help Dow's Lane maybe not have to close as often, I know that in the lower schools, there is the added issue of there being more aides around in the classrooms, providers around in the buildings. And I was just wondering, is it possible that in light of there being a pandemic, to task the classroom aides, not the one-to-one aides that children with IEPs have, but the classroom aides with duties that don't put them and classrooms at risk of exposure? I'm wondering, is it still imperative to have classroom aides when class sizes are half what they normally are? Might this be a good place to reduce the risk of spread at Dow's Lane to reduce the chances of school-wide closures. I realize that aides are part of the teaching model at Dow's Lane, but maybe in light of these unprecedented circumstances and the fact that other models obviously at Dow's Lane have been compromised in light of the pandemic, this could be another change. One, thing I was thinking that they could be tasked with is potentially helping with relocating snack time or lunchtime to outdoors. I'm not sure why that can't happen, at least. It's a mask-free activity, why they can't be eating outside, getting some folding tables, some benches, having kids outdoors more, doing that, having aides help with, moving that stuff in and out, doing, handout copying, stuff that keeps them out of the classrooms. Because I do know, and I imagine that, the more adults that are in the classroom, the more chance of exposure.
So, well, thank you for the suggestion, Sarah. And I know we had some personal communication on the subject. It is a subject that we continue to review. As you indicated, that we certainly do value the role that our aides play in our schools. They are very much a part of the learning experience of our children in supporting their learning in the classroom. They support our teachers in the delivery of instruction. But as Ms. Proper indicated earlier, that we always step back from every situation and take a look at where we can make improvements based upon the experiences that we're having. However, I just want to caution us that I don't want Sarah, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but I certainly don't want anyone to think that we're looking at necessarily aides being individuals who are introducing COVID into our schools. Frankly, we've had more students that have obviously tested positive than we have faculty members or staff members. But your point is taken about limiting the number of folks that are entering school buildings, entering classrooms. However, the one thing that I would caution us to think about is that if we are going to assign them additional responsibilities, they are going to be interacting with a wider array of students potentially. So in looking at the scenario of setting up times where they could be taking kids out for a snack, running alternate activities, that they could potentially be interacting with more individuals than they would be with a classroom that is relatively confined. An aide generally will have 2 assignments during their day, and that would be an assignment with a particular classroom where they would be with that classroom for half the day or a full day, and they may cover a lunch or a recess. So the extent of their interactions typically would be 2 classes. So it's an interesting suggestion, something that we can think through. I don't want to dismiss it, but it's something that we need to proceed with caution. And as always, I appreciate your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Next, we have Stephanie Fonseca, 25 Eiler Lane. Please recognize Ms. Fonseca.
Hi, good evening. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and thank you for all of your continued hard work. I have 3 questions, which I'm just going to read out, and hopefully you could answer them. When Dr. Harrison mentioned that there did not appear to be an academic reason for a move to this, for the 2nd and 3rd graders to move to the AM/PM model, I would be curious to learn a little bit more about what that meant. Furthermore, at the last board meeting, Ms. Ellis stated that the pace of academic progress was slower than in past years. Forgive me if my vocabulary is not properly describing this, but I was wondering, is this across K-12? Could we perhaps have more details about what that meant? And lastly, as we move towards the light at the end of this pandemic tunnel, could you describe what the process would be to move towards 100% in-person learning?
So thank you, Stephanie. I believe that I didn't say that there's academic evidence. I was referencing the data and that we didn't have compelling data points in looking at benchmark assessments. So I believe we will dig into more details associated with your first two questions at the next Board of Education meeting. What we need to move towards increased student attendance, frankly, we would need to be in a position where there's going to be loosening of the reins around the DOH guidance. Currently, the Department of Health guidance calls for the reduced density of student attendance in our schools. There is an expectation that we have 6 feet of space between individuals. And our county executive, George Latimer, has come out and actually posted a statement which I felt was profound in providing clarity on a subject that the Department of Health had been reluctant to release on its own, that indicating that there was an expectation in the Westchester schools that everyone wear masks, which was an order that he gave, and then also a written expectation in a statement that he made that we have masks and 6 feet of separation at all times. So we would honestly need to see a loosening of the guidance that would provide for more flexibility and say having a reduction to 3 feet of space between individuals. I think we're not going to see something like that occur until we have lower number of cases, of course, which is likely going to be linked to widespread vaccinations and looking at large number of folks being vaccinated. So I think that is some time off before we see that reality. Our focus right now really needs to be on the maintenance of healthy and safe school environments. And when the opportunity presents and that we believe we can provide that same safe space that we're providing today with more people in the building and remain in compliance with the New York State Department of Health guidelines, we certainly will do so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Everyone, our next meeting will be on December 22nd at 7:30, both here and via Zoom. So at this point, if I could have a motion to adjourn our public meeting for an executive session to discuss the employment history of particular persons.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. We'll take a brief recess before we start our executive session. Thank you, everyone, and good night.